shook violently. She watched the clip with her face blurred, but her attackers were shown clearly enough. She read the names Wyatt Scott, Beck Ryan, and Seth Asher, West Dorm Room 206 over and over. Kimmy started laughing hysterically. She laid back on her bed as a feeling of elation went through her, replacing the anger she was just feeling. She knew who they were and where they were. She would have to be extra careful as they were students, but she would stalk them over the next few weeks and wait for the right opportunity to act. Kimmy suddenly sat up and looked back at the video with a growing curiosity and nervousness. Who had taken the video? Why didn't they do anything if they were there? How did they get her number? Kimmy's heart rate increased as the questions raced through her mind. Someone's watching me, she said, narrowing her eyes. Darian smiled as he sat back in his desk chair. He had successfully sent the videos to the asshats and to his beautiful Kimmy. Now he would have some fun with Kimmy's attackers. He had done a bit more digging into who they were and their backgrounds. They were all well off, especially Wyatt Scott. They had a lot to lose. This was wonderful news to Darian. Those with a lot to lose were more desperate. Desperate people could be dangerous, but they could also be very stupid. The guys had already proven to be more aligned with the latter. The best part was that they all were there on sports scholarships. Darian laughed loudly, spinning in his chair. What should I destroy first? He whispered to himself happily. Wyatt's head pounded like a drum as he paced back and forth anxiously as blood dried on his head and face. Seth sat at the desk with his face in his hands as Beck sat blankly on his bed staring off into space. Who could have sent this? Wyatt mumbled. More importantly, why did they send it? What do they want? Seth interrupted. You're right, they didn't ask for anything and they didn't send it to the campus security or police. At least I don't think as we would know by now, right? Wyatt asked nervously. Maybe not, maybe we'll be arrested anytime now. Beck muttered sadly. Well, I didn't do shit. I left. This is on you too, Seth said nervously. Are you fucking kidding me right now? It shows all of us in that alleyway, asshole. If we get in trouble, so are you, because you were there and you knew what we were going to do. Wyatt responded coldly. Hey, she almost killed us. She also threatened us. It's not like she's innocent, Beck said, stuttering. It was self-defense, idiot. She could have shot you and been in the right. Seth responded coldly. I have to call my dad, Wyatt said anxiously. Are you joking? Beck said, jumping from his bed. He'll fix this. He can find who sent this and pay them off like he always does, Wyatt said, smiling. Yeah, then he's going to kick your ass and tell our parents, and our asses will be kicked too because of some idiotic plan you had. Seth responded angrily, rubbing his hand through his hair. It doesn't matter, does it? This needs to go away, like now. I'm calling him. Wyatt took a deep breath and begrudgingly dialed his father's number. His hand shook nervously as his father answered in his familiar stern voice. Seth and Beck watched anxiously as Wyatt explained the situation, changing some details to make them seem less guilty than what they were. Unknowingly, by pressing the video, Wyatt had downloaded Darian's spyware into his phone. Darian sat smiling at his desk as he listened and recorded the conversation between Wyatt and his father. His father cussed at him like a stranger after his distorted confession where Kimmy was painted as a Jezebel-esque seductress who purposely led him on and then publicly embarrassed him. To Darian's delight, his father asked for the video clip. Once he opened it, Darian would have access to his phone as well, maybe even his computer, as most people had them connected. Everything was going splendidly. Darian sat up as Wyatt's father promised to look into it and fix the situation. He threatened his son with harsh words and obscenities before abruptly hanging up. Darian smiled as his face became illuminated by his computer screen. He watched in excitement as his spyware successfully infiltrated Armand Scott's, Wyatt's father, phone. He scrolled through, finding some interesting information and the contact information to Seth and Beck's parents and their businesses. As the threads of deception tightened around Wyatt, Beck, and Seth, they find themselves caught in a web they can't escape. What they thought was a simple video message has turned into the opening move of a much larger, more dangerous game. Their every move is being watched, every mistake documented. But the real power lies in the hands of those who play from the shadows, manipulating their every step. The fear of exposure grows, but with each passing moment, the true enemy remains hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One thing is certain, nothing will be the same again. As they prepare for the storm to come, they'll have to reckon with the demons of their past and face the consequences of underestimating the quiet ones who never forget. Philosophizaboy. I think there's something wrong with my reflection. Introduction. In a house that once promised a fresh start, a woman grapples with a loss that consumes her every thought. What was supposed to be a refuge becomes a prison, and a place meant for solitude slowly turns into something far more sinister, deliberate. But when I forced myself out of bed to check, there was nothing. Just silence, thick and oppressive. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Days bled into each other. I wandered the empty rooms, the floors creaking beneath my weight, each groan sounding like the house's whispering voice. Objects started disappearing, small things at first, a spoon, a pen, my keys. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just forgetful. Grief does that to you. I'd forget my own name if I didn't say it out loud sometimes. But the mirror, that was harder to ignore. It started with glances, catching the corner of my reflection when I wasn't looking for it. I'd be in the kitchen, washing dishes, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see something move in the hall mirror. At first, I thought it was just my reflection, delayed somehow. But it wasn't. One night, as I passed the mirror, I saw her, me, standing there, staring back. Only she wasn't copying me. I froze, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. My reflection stood still, her face slack, eyes wide and dull. She was waiting. Watching. I reached a trembling hand toward the glass, but before I could touch it, she moved. Not a blink, not a shift in weight, just a sudden, violent jerk. Her hand shot up to the glass, slamming against it with a sickening thud. I screamed and stumbled back, but when I looked again, my reflection was normal. A terrified, pale version of myself. I backed away, avoiding the mirror for the rest of the night, every muscle in my body wound tight, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Not yet. The next day, I started hearing the voice. It whispered, faint at first, almost like a breeze, but then it grew louder. Clearer. It was Dan. I was sure of it. His voice, soft and familiar, coming from the walls, the floors, the cracks in the wood. He was calling me, telling me he wasn't gone, that he was trapped here. With me. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted it so badly. The grief in me ached, tearing at the seams. I spent hours sitting in the dark, listening for him, begging for more. But all I got were whispers, taunting, cruel. The voice turned from gentle to accusing, blaming me for his death, telling me I had abandoned him. You let me die, he hissed through the walls. You should be with me. Come back to me. I tried to shut it out, but it followed me from room to room. The objects that had disappeared started showing up in strange places, on the bed, in the fridge, inside my shoes. Things I didn't even own appeared in the house, an old pocket watch, a child's stuffed bear, a photograph of someone I didn't know, their eyes scratched out. The mirror was the worst. Every time I passed it, she was there. My reflection. But she wasn't me anymore. Her eyes followed me, tracking my movements. She smiled when I wasn't looking. A cold, mocking grin that stretched too wide. I tried covering the mirror with a sheet, but every time I left the room, the sheet would be on the floor when I returned, the glass gleaming as if nothing had been there at all. By now, I was hardly sleeping. The voice never stopped. My reflection never looked away. Then, last night, it happened. I woke to the sound of glass shattering. Heart racing, I sat up in bed, blinking in the dark. The mirror. I knew it before I even stepped into the hallway. I could feel it, like a heartbeat, pulsing in the walls. The mirror was broken, shards scattered across the floor. But in the middle of the glass stood a figure, tall and dark, shifting like a shadow made of flesh. It smiled at me, my reflection, no longer behind the glass but standing in my home, dripping with something dark and sticky. I tried to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat as she moved closer, her smile splitting her face in two, wide and grotesque. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice like shattered glass. "Come be with him." I ran, but the house twisted around me, the walls groaning as they stretched and warped. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps quick and sharp like the ticking of a clock. Closer, closer. Now I'm here, hiding in the attic, my back pressed against the cold wood. The whispers are louder, Dan's voice mingling with hers, calling me, telling me to give in, to join them. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The door is creaking open. And the mirror is gone. I think she is too. Outro. The house, once a silent witness to the echoes of grief, now stands as a monument to something far darker. The woman's struggle to escape the past has led her to a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead have crumbled. As the whispers fade into nothingness and the house grows silent once more, it remains unclear whether she truly escaped or was consumed by the very forces she sought to outrun. The mirror is gone, but the haunting remains, lurking in the spaces between memory and madness. For some, there is no closure, no final goodbye, only an endless echo, trapped in a place where reflection and reality no longer make sense. Creepy__us. The last 2 years have been absolute torture, and I can't tell this to anyone without being sent back to the loony bin. The 2 others that survived, I can't talk to them about it because they won't speak to me, and I don't blame them. I've been riddled with such unbearable guilt at what happened 2 years ago, and if I don't say something now, I don't. I don't know how much longer I can last. If I will even last, whether I say anything or not. Before I tell you this story, about what happened to the lot of us, there's something you need to understand. What I'm about to tell you, you won't believe, and I don't expect you to. I couldn't give 2s*** guess if anyone believed me or not. I'm doing this for me, for those who died and for the 2 who still have to live on with this. I'm going to tell you the story. I'm going to tell you everything. And you're gonna judge me. Even if you don't believe me, you'll judge me. In fact, you'll despise me. I've been despising myself. For the past 2 years, all I've done since I've been out of that jungle is numb myself with drink and drugs, numb enough that I don't even recall ever being inside that place. That only makes it worse. Far worse. But I can't help myself. I've gotten all the mental health support I can get. I've been in and out of the psychiatric ward, given a roundabout of doctors and a never-ending supply of pills, but what help is all that when you can't even tell the truth about what really happened to you? As far as the doctors know, as far as the world knows, all that happened was that a group of stupid adults, who thought they knew how to solve the world's problems, got themselves lost in one of the most dangerous parts of the world. If only they knew how dangerous that place really is, and that's the real reason why I'm telling my story now. Because as long as that place exists, as long as no one does anything about it, none of us are safe. None of us. I journeyed into the real heart of darkness. The locals, they call it the Asili. Like I said, this all happened around 2 years ago. I was living a comfortable life in North London at the time, waiting tables and washing dishes for a living. That's what happens when you drop out of university, I guess. Life was good though, you know? Like, it was comfortable. I looked forward to the football at the weekend, and honestly, London isn't that bad of a place to live. It's busy, people and traffic everywhere, but London just seems like one of those places that brings the whole world to your feet. One day though, I get a text from my girlfriend Nadia, or at that time, my ex-girlfriend Nadia. She was studying in the States at the time and we tried to keep it long distance, but you know how it goes. You just lose touch. Anyway, she texts me, wanting to know if we can do a video call or something, and I said yes, and being the right idiot I was, I thought maybe she wanted to try things out again. wasn't exactly the case. I mean, she did say that she missed me and was always thinking about me, and I thought the same, but she actually had some news. She had this group of friends, you see, an activist group. They called themselves the, BADS, what that stood for I don't know. They were basically this group of woke students that wanted equal rights for all races, genders and stuff, I dunno. Anyway, Nadia tells me that her and her friends were all planning a trip to Africa together, to the Congo, actually, and she says that they were going to start their own commune there in the ecosystem of the rainforest. I know what you're thinking, it sounds badass T mad. And that's what I said. Nadia did somewhat agree with me, but her reasoning was that the world is not getting any more equal and it's never really going to change, and so her friends said why not start our own community in paradise. I'm not sure a war-torn country riddled with disease counts as paradise, but I guess to an American, any exotic jungle might seem that way. Anyway, Nadia then says to me that the group are short of people going, and she wondered if I was interested in joining their commune. I of course said no F***G thank you, but she kept insisting. She mentioned that the real reason we broke up was because her friends had been planning this trip for a long time and she didn't think our relationship was worth carrying on anymore. She still loved me, she said, and that she wanted us to get back together. As happy as I was to hear she wanted me back, this didn't exactly sound like the Nadia I knew. I mean, Nadia was smart, really smart actually, and she did get carried away with politics and that, but even for her, this all felt quite mad. I told her I'd have an answer for her by the end of the week, and against my better judgment I said yes. I said yes, not because I wanted to go, course I didn't want to go. Who really wants to go live in the F***G jungle? I said yes because I still loved her, and I was worried about her. I was worried she'd get into some real trouble down there, and I wanted to make sure she'd be alright. I just assumed the commune idea wouldn't work, and when Nadia and her friends realized that, they would all sod off back to the States. I just wanted to be there in case anything did happen. Maybe I was just as much of an idiot as them lot. We were all idiots. Well, a few months later, I was boarding a plane at Heathrow Airport and heading to Kinshasa, capital of the, Democratic Congo. My big sister Ellie, she begged me not to go. She said I was putting myself in danger and I agreed, but Poppins, either that or he would try mimicking my accent to make me sound like a chimney sweeper or something. Jerome was basically a copy and paste version of Moses. It was like he idealized him or something, always following him around and repeating whatever he said. And then there was Ty. Even for a guy, I could tell that Ty was good looking. He kind of looked like a Rastafarian, but his dreads only went down to his neck. Out of the three of them, Ty was the only one who bothered to shake my hand, but something about it seemed disingenuous, like someone had forced him to do it. Oh. I think I forgot to mention it, everyone in the group was black, Nadia included. The only ones who weren't were me and Angela. Angela wasn't part of the BADS. She was Beth's girlfriend. Angela, she was pretty cool. She was a little older than the rest of us, and she apparently had an army background. I mean, it wasn't hard to tell she had short boy's hair and looked like she did a lot of rock climbing or something. She didn't really talk much and mostly kept to herself, but it actually made me feel easier with her there, not because of, but because neither of us were BADS members. From what Nadia told me, Moses was hoping to create a black utopia of sorts. His argument was that humanity began in Africa, and so as an African-American group, Africa would be the perfect destination for their commune. I guess me and Angela tagging along kind of ruined all that. As much as Moses didn't like me, it turned out Ty hated me for different reasons. Sometimes I would just catch him staring at me, like he just hated the S***T out of me. I wouldn't learn till later why that was. What happens next was the journey up the Congo River. Not much really happened, so I'll just try my best to skip through it. Luckily for us, the river was right next to the airport, so reaching it didn't take long, which meant we got to avoid the hours-long traffic. As bad as I thought London traffic was, Kinshasa was apparently much worse. We get to the river and it's huge, I mean, really huge. The Congo River was apparently one of the largest rivers in the world, and it basically made the Thames look like a puddle. Anyway, we get there and there's this guy waiting for us by an old wooden boat with a motor. I thought he looked pretty shady, but Moses apparently arranged the whole thing. This guy, he only ever spoke French, so I never really understood what he was saying, but Moses spoke some French and he pays him the money. We all jump in the boat with our things and the man starts taking us up the river. The journey upriver was good and bad. The region we were going to was days away, but it gave me time to reacquaint with Nadia, and the scenery, it was beautiful. To begin with, there was people on the river everywhere fishing in their boats or canoes and ferries more crammed than London Underground. At the halfway point of our journey, we stopped at this huge, crowded port town called Mbandaka to get supplies, and after that, everything was different. The river, I mean, the scenery, it was like we left civilization behind or something. Everything was green and exotic. It honestly felt like we had stepped back in time with the dinosaurs. I do remember reading that the Congo had its own version of the Loch Ness monster somewhere, that it's a water dinosaur that lives deep in the jungle. It's called the Makol Bembe or something like that. Where we were going, I wasn't sure if I was hoping to see it or not. I did look forward to seeing some animals on this trip, and Nadia told me we would probably get to see hippos or elephants, but that was a total letdown. We could hear birds and monkeys in the trees along the river, but we couldn't see them. I guess I thought this boat ride was going to be a safari of sorts. We did see a group of crocodiles sunbathing by the riverbanks, and if there was one thing on that boat ride I feared the most, it was definitely crocodiles. I think I avoided going near the edge of the boat the entire way there. The heat on the boat was unbearable, and for like half the journey it just poured with rain, but the humidity was like nothing I ever experienced. In the last 2 days of the boat ride, all it did was rain, constantly. I mean, we were all drenched. The river started to get more and more narrow, like, narrow enough for only one boat to fit through. The guy driving the boat started speeding round the bends of the river at a dangerous speed. We honestly didn't know why he was in a rush all of a sudden. We curve round one bend and that's when we all notice a man waving us down by the side of the bank. It was like he had been waiting for us. Turns out this was also planned. This man, through the trees and bushes before I'm stopped in my tracks by the same makeshift barrier fence, and the pure darkness on the other side, and every time I'm wanting to go enter it. I don't know why, because this part of the dream always terrifies me, but it's like I have to find what's on the other side. Something was calling me. On the third night of our new commune though, I dreamt something different. I dreamt I was actually on the other side. I can't remember much of what I saw, but it was dark, really dark. But I could walk. I was walking through the darkness and I could only just make out the tree trunks and the occasional branch or vine, but then I saw a light, ahead only 20 meters away. I tried walking towards the light, but it was hard, like when you walk or run in your dreams, but you barely move anywhere. I do catch up to the light, and it's just a light, glowing, but then I enter it. I enter and I realize what I've entered's now a clearing, a perfect circle inside the jungle, dark green vegetation around the curves, and inside this circle, right bang in the middle, is one single tree, or at least the trunk of a tree, a dead, rotting tree. It had roots that were like octopus legs that curled around the circle's edges, and the wood was very dark, almost black in color. A pathway lined with stones leads up to the tree, and I start walking along it. The closer I get to this tree, I see just how tall it must have been originally. A long stump of a tree, it leans over me like a tower. Its shadow comes over me and I feel like I've been swallowed up, but then the tree's shadow moves away from me, as though beyond this jungle's darkness is a hidden rotating sun, and when the shadow disappears, I see a face, high above me on the bark of the tree, carved into it. It looked like a mask, like an African tribal mask. The face was round and it only had slits for eyes and a mouth, but somehow, the face looked like it was in agony, the most unbearable agony. I could feel it. It was like torture, like being stabbed all over 1,000,000 times or having your own skin peeled off while you're paralyzed. I then feel something down by my ankles. I look down to my feet and then I look around the circle. The floor of the circle is covered with what look like hands, severed hands, littered all over. I try and raise my feet, panicking. I'm too scared to step on them, but then the hands start moving, twitching their fingers. They start crawling like spiders all around the circle. The ones by my feet start to crawl up my legs and I'm too scared to brush them off. I feel the hands crawling all over me and I feel like I can't move. I then feel a huge weight come over me and I fall to the floor and I hear a zip. End of part 1. Outro. What happened in that jungle, the things we saw, the things we became, will haunt me for the rest of my days. And the truth of what I've told you, the truth of the Asali, is not just some terrifying tale spun for shock value. It's a warning. I don't expect you to believe me, I really don't. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I'm telling you this because I have to. Because the memories of what we did, what we unleashed, are too heavy for me to carry alone any longer. I've told you the story of my journey into the real heart of darkness, the place that called to me, that twisted my mind, that tore us apart. The others. I don't know where they are. The ones who died, they never deserved any of it. The ones who survived, well, they don't want to talk to me. I don't blame them. But me? I'll be left with this burden forever, and I don't think I'll ever escape it. As for the place itself, the Asali, I don't know if it's still there. I don't know if it ever really existed in the way we understood it. But I do know one thing for sure, there's something out there, waiting. And I don't think we're the last to stumble across it. Maybe one day, someone else will venture into that cursed jungle. Maybe they'll find the clearing, the tree, and the hands. Or maybe the jungle will find them first. But whatever happens, I pray they don't make the same mistake we did. Because some darknesses, once uncovered, can never be forgotten. That's all I have to say. The rest, well, it's in the past. And as for me, I'll carry it until I can't anymore. Story her screams. I knew there was something off about my new employer, but I didn't expect this. The first time I saw the Bluefin Diner, it was exactly the kind of place I expected to find in a wasteland like this. Route 66 stretched ahead like a ribbon of asphalt through the barren desert, the air shimmering with heat under the relentless afternoon sun. The road seemed endless, with nothing but barren land and the occasional cactus breaking the monotony. It was the kind of desolation that made you feel small, insignificant, just another speck in the vastness of the universe. I'd been on the move for weeks, drifting from town to town, with nothing but my old duffel bag and a sense of hollowness that had settled in my chest like a stone. After losing my job and falling out with the few friends I had, it felt like there was nothing left for me anywhere. The nights were the hardest sleepless hours spent staring at motel ceilings, wondering if I would ever find a place where I belonged. I had no family to turn to, and each new town was just another place to pass through, another attempt to escape the emptiness inside. I have no family, no friends, and no place to call home. The kind of person who could disappear without a trace, and no one would even notice. It was as if I was a ghost already, drifting aimlessly, waiting for anything to give me a reason to stay. When I pulled into the parking lot, there wasn't a soul in sight, just a faded sign hanging by a single rusty chain that read "Help Wanted" and an old gas pump out front that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. The diner itself looked like it had been forgotten by time, the paint peeling, the windows dusty and streaked. It was a relic of a bygone era, a place that seemed to exist out of sheer stubbornness. I paused for a moment, staring at the sign. Maybe this was what I needed. I had nowhere else to go, no direction, just a longing for a place to belong, even if just for a few nights. The thought of having something to do, even if it was just washing dishes or sweeping floors, was enough to make me consider it. I pushed the thought away, taking a deep breath, and made my way inside, the bell above the door chiming softly as I stepped inside. The dim interior was a mix of peeling wallpaper, cracked linoleum floors, and flickering neon lights that cast eerie shadows across the empty booths. The air was thick with the smell of grease and old coffee, a mix that clung to my senses, making my stomach turn slightly. A single man stood behind the counter, his face lined and weathered, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. He was the owner, though he never bothered to tell me his name. I hesitated for a moment before making my way to a booth in the corner. I slid into the cracked vinyl seat, the material sticking to my skin as I settled in. The owner watched me, his expression unreadable, his hollow eyes following my every move as if sizing me up. After a moment, he shuffled over, a notepad in hand. "What'll it be?" he asked, his voice gruff, his tone making it clear he wasn't interested in small talk. I glanced at the faded menu lying on the table, the pages yellowed with age and stained with coffee rings. There wasn't much to choose from, and everything looked like it had been there since the place first opened. "Just a coffee, please," I replied, offering a small, tentative smile, though I doubted it would make any difference. He nodded, turning away without a word. I watched as he moved behind the counter, the sound of the coffee machine breaking the silence. It felt strange, almost surreal, sitting there in the empty diner, the hum of the old refrigerator the only other noise. The neon sign outside flickered, casting brief flashes of red and blue across the room, adding to the sense of unease that seemed to permeate the place. He returned a moment later, setting the chipped mug in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, savoring the warmth, even if the coffee itself tasted burnt and bitter. It was something tangible, something to hold on to in the unsettling quiet of the diner. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He gave a curt nod, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned away, his footsteps echoing across the empty floor as he retreated behind the counter. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, even when his back was turned. I cleared my throat, pointing towards the sign outside. "You hiring?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended, the words barely carrying across the empty room. He looked at me for a moment, his gaze weighing on me, then nodded slowly, as if the decision wasn't really his to make, as if he was resigned to whatever fate had brought me here. "Need a job?" he asked, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth, like he had heard the same request 100 times before and knew how it would end. I nodded. The truth was, I needed money enough to get me out of this place, to the next town, and maybe a little further. He didn't ask any questions, didn't want to know where I was from or what had brought me here. He just nodded back, a small, almost imperceptible movement of his head, like he understood more than he was letting on. "Okay. You'll start tonight," he muttered, his voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Was it pity, or maybe just indifference? He hesitated for a moment, then gestured for me to follow him. "Let me show you around," he said, his voice still gruff but with a hint of resignation, as if he knew that neither of us had much of a choice in the matter. I got up from the booth, the seat creaking as I stood, and followed him through the diner. He moved slowly, pointing out the essentials with a practiced efficiency, his voice a monotonous drone as he spoke. "The counter, where you'll be serving. Coffee machine temperamental, but it works if you treat it right. Kitchen's back here," he said, pushing open the swinging door to reveal a grimy room filled with old pots and pans. His words were clipped, like he was simply going through the motions. There was a weariness to him, an exhaustion that seemed to seep into every word he spoke. He showed me the storage room, the restrooms, and even the back exit, his explanations brief and to the point. There was no warmth in his words, no attempt to make me feel at ease. Just the basics, like he'd done this before, like he knew I wouldn't be here long. After a while, he turned back to the front, pausing by the door. "That's about it. Good luck, kid," he said, his hollow eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. There was something in his gaze, something unsaid, but before I could make sense of it, he grabbed his coat from behind the counter and walked out, the door closing with a jingle of the bell. I watched him disappear into the night, something about the way he'd said those words making my skin prickle. There was an emptiness in the diner now, a void that seemed to expand in his absence. But I ignored it. I needed this. I needed something to keep me grounded, even if it was just for a little while. I walked around the diner, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the cracked vinyl booths, and the flickering neon lights that cast an eerie glow over everything. There was something unsettling about the place, something that felt wrong, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the isolation, the sense of being completely cut off from the rest of the world. I went to the kitchen in the back, a grimy little room filled with pots and pans that had seen better days. The air was thick with the scent of stale grease and something metallic, and I could hear the faint drip of water echoing from a leaking pipe. The floor creaked under my weight, and every surface seemed to carry a layer of grime that spoke of years of neglect. There was a window above the sink, looking out over the parking lot, and beyond that, a lake. It was the only thing that broke the monotony of the desert, a dark, still body of water that seemed to go on forever. I settled in behind the counter, a cup of lukewarm coffee in front of me as I tried to stay awake. The hours dragged on, the silence pressing in on me, until I heard it, only by the faint buzz of the flickering neon sign outside. It was almost 1 in the morning, and the road outside was empty. Nothing but darkness stretching into oblivion. The hum of the old refrigerator seemed to grow louder in the quiet, a low, unsettling drone that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I could hear the occasional creak of the building settling, the soft rustle of something brushing against the outside walls, maybe the wind, or maybe something else. The air felt colder now, the chill creeping in, making me shiver. I decided to take a break from the unnerving quiet and clean the restrooms. I grabbed a rag and some cleaning supplies and made my way to the back. The restrooms were just as grimy as the rest of the diner, the tiles cracked and stained, the mirror above the sink coated in a layer of grime that made my reflection look ghostly. I scrubbed at the sink and wiped down the counters, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that seemed to be pressing in on me. The sound of dripping water echoed off the walls, each drop seeming louder than the last. When I finally finished, I took a deep breath and made my way back to the front of the diner. But as soon as I stepped out of the restroom, my heart froze. There, on the floor, were wet footprints. I dropped the rag I was holding, the sound of it hitting the ground barely registering in my ears. The footprints led from the door, across the diner floor, and toward the counter where I stood. They were elongated, almost human but not quite, with webbed impressions that suggested something unnatural. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes tracing the eerie shape, each step seeming deliberate, as if whatever made them had been searching for me. I remembered the second rule: clean them immediately with hot water. My heart pounded in my chest as I rushed to the back, my footsteps echoing through the empty diner. I fumbled with the bucket, my hands trembling as I turned on the tap, the hot water rushing out and steaming up in the cold air of the kitchen. Every second felt like an eternity, the feeling of something closing in on me growing stronger. I could almost sense eyes watching, waiting. I filled the bucket to the brim, the hot water scalding my hands as I picked it up, my grip shaky. As I hurried back to the front, my nerves got the best of me. I stumbled, the bucket slipping from my grip, hot water sloshing over the sides and splashing across the floor. Panic surged through me, my breath catching in my throat as I scrambled to pick it up. The scalding water burned my hands, but I barely felt the pain. My only focus was on those wet footprints. They were growing darker, spreading across the floor like an ink stain, each print more defined, more deliberate. It was as if whatever had made them was gaining strength, its presence becoming more real, more solid. I grabbed the rag, my hands trembling as I dipped it into the bucket and began scrubbing at the prints. The hot water steamed as it hit the floor, the vapor rising around me like a fog. I swore I heard something hiss, low and menacing, like the sound of steam escaping from a valve. It was followed by a whisper, faint but unmistakable, as if something was speaking to me, taunting me. I scrubbed harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the fear clawing at my insides. The footprints slowly began to fade, the dark impressions dissolving under the hot water, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. My eyes darted to the windows, half expecting to see something staring back at me, but there was nothing, only darkness and my own reflection, pale and terrified. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the reflection, a flicker of something shifting behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there, only the empty diner, silent and still. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, but the fear lingered, gnawing at me, refusing to let go. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, pressing in on me, waiting for me to slip up, to make a mistake. By the time I was done, the diner felt colder, the air heavy and oppressive, the silence almost deafening. I set the bucket down, my hands aching from the burns, and took a step back, staring at the floor. The footprints were gone, but the sense of unease remained, an invisible weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Something wrong was going on here, and I knew this wasn't the last time I would see something like this. I glanced at the windows, half expecting to see something staring back at me, but there was nothing, just darkness and my own reflection, pale and frightened. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the reflection, a flicker of something shifting behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I forced myself to breathe, to calm. I knew the danger hadn't passed. I let out a slow, shaky breath, my heart still racing. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure stood by the window. Tall and gaunt, with matted hair falling over a face that was half hidden in shadow, except for its eyes. Those eyes gleamed through the glass, piercing, like they could see straight through me. Its lips curved into a cruel smile, revealing teeth jagged and sharp, too sharp, as if they were meant to tear through something soft and fragile. My hands trembled as I clutched the counter, fighting the urge to look, to meet those eyes. But I could feel it calling me, its voice slithering into my mind like a twisted lullaby, a hum that carried with it the weight of everything I'd tried to escape. The creature knew me. It whispered my name, my secrets, my regrets, each word laced with venom, each syllable pulling me closer to the breaking point. Just as I felt myself slipping, the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a force that snapped me back to reality. The old man stood there, his eyes wild, his face twisted in terror. He looked at me, and in that moment, I saw more fear in him than I had ever seen in anyone. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Sorry, kid," he whispered, his words thick with guilt. "You weren't supposed to make it this far." Before I could react, he strode toward the window, his hands shaking as he reached for the latch. My heart sank, fear twisting in my gut as I realized what was happening. He was letting it inside. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Why was he doing this, and what would happen if he succeeded? The sense of betrayal and desperation made my pulse quicken, and I felt utterly powerless, my feet glued to the floor as the horror unfolded in front of me. As the old man's trembling fingers fumbled with the latch, the creature's grin widened, its sharp teeth glinting as though it could already taste what was to come. I took a step back, dread coiling in my gut, every fiber of my being screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move, my legs frozen in place as the man turned back to me, his face hollow and filled with a strange mix of desperation and surrender. "I didn't want this," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, as if trying to convince himself more than me. But I had no choice. It keeps her satisfied and it keeps me safe. He swallowed, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. But it's never enough. The horror of his words crashed over me. I was just one more in a long line of sacrifices, lured here to save his miserable life. The disgust was overwhelming, but there was no time to think. Behind him, the creature's fingers curled over the window frame, long and dripping with a dark, murky substance that trailed down the glass like ink. A rush of panic surged through me. I had to stop him, to prevent whatever horror was clawing its way into the diner. Desperate, I charged at the old man, my body colliding with his as I tried to stop him from opening the window. He grunted, his eyes flashing with a wild fury as he shoved me back. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking, filled with both fear and anger. He lunged at me, his hands outstretched, trying to pin me down for the creature that was now moving steadily towards us. We struggled, our bodies crashing into tables and chairs, the metal legs scraping loudly against the floor. His hands wrapped around my wrists, his strength surprising for someone who looked so frail. I could feel his nails digging into my skin, his breath hot and ragged against my face. My heart thundered in my chest as I glanced over his shoulder. The creature was inside now, its twisted form moving with a sickening fluidity, its pale skin glistening, its mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted my body, managing to free one hand. My fingers scrambled across the counter until they closed around something cold and metallic, a kitchen knife. Without thinking, I plunged it into the old man's side. He let out a choked gasp, his grip loosening as his eyes widened in shock and pain. I pushed him away from me, his body stumbling backward, directly towards the creature. The creature's eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger as it reached out, its long, wet fingers wrapping around the old man's shoulders. He barely had time to scream before the creature sank its teeth into his neck, the sharp fangs tearing through flesh with a sickening crunch. His body went rigid, his eyes wide with terror as the creature dragged him down, its teeth still embedded in his neck. I could see the blood trailing behind them, dark and slick, leaving a gruesome path as it pulled him closer to the open window. His screams echoed through the diner, a desperate, haunting sound that sent shivers down my spine. His eyes locked onto mine one last time, filled with a pleading, terrified look, but there was nothing I could do. He was beyond saving. They reached the window, and with a final, jerking motion, the creature dragged him into the shadows outside. The old man's screams were cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the creature's rasping breath and the faint crunch of his body being pulled over the gravel outside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heart hammered as I listened to the horrible, wet sounds fading into the distance. Without looking back, I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding against the linoleum as I burst through the front door and into the cool night air. Outside, the world was still and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. The cold air bit into my skin, grounding me as I staggered forward, trying to shake the horrifying images from my mind. I kept walking, my steps unsteady. He was paralyzed. Oh no. Oh God, no, not tonight. Panic takes over his entire body, chills shoot down his spine as he feels a hand tenderly placed upon him. Mark, honey, it's okay. Mommy won't hurt you again. An eerie voice creeps out, rough like she just got done smoking a cigarette. He recognizes the voice, but it's not his mother. He knew not who it is, but what it is. And it is not a person, much less his parents. His father died before he was born, and his mother lost custody of him, then committed suicide. He didn't know his parents, and his mind knew that. His mind used that. Abruptly, his coworker Yase entered the office, the sound of the door swinging open, pulling Mark back into reality. He sits up straight. He can feel himself shaking, the uncertainty of what just happened. It wasn't real, he tried to remind himself. I can't let that shit get to really Mark. Sleeping on the job again? Come on man, what if I was an intruder? Although his comment had a serious tone, Yase still let out a chuckle. It was okay now, he had his friend, in fact, his only friend. Well yeah, I've just been out of it since Vanessa and I broke up, you know? It feels like the world suddenly just stopped and now I have to fight to focus or sleep. Oh, I totally understand man, you need to get that girl off your mind. Truthfully, I never liked her, it always felt like she was judging me. As he made this remark, Mark batted an eye at him and he knew to move off the subject. Well anyway, I'm sorry, tonight Jack and his brother are having a party, you wanna go? A strange offer coming from Yase considering he and Jack got into a drunken fist fight last time they were around each other. Do I wanna go meet clueless women and do Molly? Nah, I think I'm good on that one, Chief. Sarcasm drenched Mark's words, he was feeling irritable. As that irritable feeling expanded like a bursting balloon, he began to bite his nails, a bad habit Mark let destroy any hope of having normal nails. You know, I wouldn't go to a party where drugs are being peddled around. This one is more chill, you should get out of the house, man. Mark knew he was trying to do a good thing, but something felt off about the offer. Alright, just shut up about it, I'll think about going, for a few minutes. Okay? The pause before he said okay reassured Yase he would genuinely consider his offer. The next hour flies by, and they sit around in the office staring at the camera feed, sometimes doing a routine check of the premises, making sure the building is clean and there aren't any animals or people. They work at a pharmaceutical company as security. Mark pondered how a guy like Yase, who was tall and built, his long black dreads had blonde tips, along with a very slight but recognizable Jamaican accent, ended up taking this job with Mark. He knows why he's there. He doesn't sleep, so he worked as a night security guard. Although he figures Yase fit the role more, Mark is slim build. Not weak, but he wasn't as strong as Yase. He wasn't intimidating, he knows that. I turned to look at Yase, who was fiddling with the zipper to his security jacket. Yo man, this van has been parked in the parking lot for like half an hour. It isn't one of ours, is it? He bends over and looks down at the feed. I don't think so. Maybe we should go check it out. He turns around and heads for the office door. Wait, I don't know. Are you sure we should go out there? He isn't a particular fan of confrontation. Yase, however, could care less. Well, there's an unmarked van suspiciously sitting in the parking lot. They don't have a license plate. Let me think about it. Let's go, Mark. An assertiveness echoed in his voice when he said Mark's name. Mark and him both headed out of the office. Mark stood side by side with him, a way to let the civilian know there's no one in charge. He overthrew the situation. On the off chance it's a criminal, what do they do? It's too late to think. They exit the building through the west wing door. As Mark and Yase approach the van, they can hear music blaring to the point the shaking of the rusted metal on the van is audible. At first they mistook the music for a house a block or so down the street. Sometimes they had house parties. The music would be so loud you could hear it from the west wing door. Yase approached the van, knocking on the tinted window. The back didn't have windows. Excuse me. Roll the window down, please. He shouted over the music. There was a pause, then the music turned down, and the window came down with it. Cigarette smoke rolls out of the car, and a slight hack comes from a sunken pale face that emerges from the smoke. Why hello there, gentlemen. Didn't mean to bother anyone, thought I was alone. The tone of the man's voice made Mark visibly wary. You see that building over there? Yase points to the pharmacy. We work here, this is private property, and I'm afraid you can't just park out here and blast music. The man's cold eyes travel over to Mark, examining him. He feels chills hit his spine again. The man's eyes glide up and down. He just let out a chuckle as if something funny had come to mind. Well, that's my bad. I can take my leave. It's not like I wasn't doing anything important, just taking a minute, you know? Mark looked at Yase, who seemed uneasy, not nervous, but alert. Mark wondered why. Your van is missing plates. Why is that? Yase's tone sharpened. They just expired. Already had a cop try and pull me over about it. Got a damn ticket. Yase interrupted the man. He could feel something off with this whole situation. The vibe of the man was just off. Maybe I should call the cops, get a search warrant for the tinted van, and another ticket for the plates, unless we all want to just carry on with our night. He made it clear they weren't just there to chat, which seems to be the impression this disturbed man got. Right, the man roughly grumbled, his whole tone and mood shifting. Without saying another word, the tinted window came back up, the music blasting before he took off, speeding out of the parking lot. Jesus, what an asshole, and a creep. I don't know, something was off about that guy, right? He turned to Mark, waiting for his confirmation. But Mark stood perfectly still, staring right at where the man was once perched against a window. The way he looked at me, it was like a lion looking at its prey. I couldn't breathe. The entire night had been one weird premonition. Mark had a terrible feeling. Something is coming. I don't know when, I don't know what, but something. Mark found himself sitting back in the office chair, waiting for Yase to finish the final check of the property. Those woods, that woman, that man, what is it all? Am I crazy to think they're connected? You already know you're crazy. His mind ponders and ponders until it drifts. He lays back in the chair, his muscles relaxing until he finds himself sleeping. Now he stands before the hut, the glistening trees that shout their fragrance through the wind. His senses are overwhelmed. He's here. Mark steps forward, the shining white snow crunching beneath his Timberland boots. He pares his head to just barely peek into the tent, but his eyes hit a sight he can't comprehend. A woman sitting calmly with her legs crossed and hands folded in one another. Mark recognizes the majestic dark skin. She was beautiful, her skin so smooth it almost looked like she was devoid of pores. But the most distinguishing detail, the thing that stuck with Mark throughout the years, that beautiful, silk, long, black hair. Her face had no facial features, and suddenly Mark knew, it's his mother, bits and pieces of her. Mark only had one photo as a child, her face faded in it. Across from her sat Vanessa, And Yase. What the hell is this? Mark was so wrapped up in his train of thought he forgot this was all a fantasy, a dream. Mom, is that you? Oh Mark, we'll be together again soon. Don't worry, all of us will, Vanessa spoke. Mark's eyes widened. When his mind mimicked loved ones, there were features he could use to identify they weren't real, a useful skill to have during his sleep paralysis. But her voice sounded so real. What is that supposed to dash? Mark, Yase stands up from the dinner table. Wake up. What? Mark's tone bluntly screams frightened. Wake up. Mark. He shoots up from the desk, sporadically, turning to meet Yase's eyes. You alright, dude? You were shaking and you looked all sweaty. He chuckled. Yeah man, I'm fine. I am not fine, Mark thought immediately following his response. There was a pause from both of us. Yase took this as a signal to move on. You want to check out that party, even just for a little bit? Mark sighed. He didn't, but he knew Yase was just worried about him. Sure, let's go. They both left the building. Mark didn't drive to work, so his car wasn't there. They both got into Yase's yellow 1997 Ford Ranger. Not a bad car, a little older, but Mark always liked the way the car looked. Even if he wasn't a fan of Ford, he could appreciate a pretty car. When they got into the car, there was this feeling, close to awkward but not awkward. Hey Mark, you were mumbling something about your mom earlier. You seemed pretty shaken up. What's going on lately? You're barely sleeping, nodding off at work. Genuine concern echoed from his voice. I'm okay. You know, I was just thinking I've never really told you about my parents, huh? Your parents? Yase's tone shifted, from concern to curiosity. Yeah, my father passed away before I was born. I was born and lived in Canada. Well, not for long anyway. I only have a few memories. It's getting harder to remember these days. I can't even think of what my mother looks like anymore. They took me away from her, so I mostly remember growing up in homes. You've never mentioned any of this before. I'm just wondering why bring it up now? Not something I love to talk about, but you're my best friend, and I want you to know that, I guess. Know me? Mark's stomach twisted. This hurts. So, they took me away from my mom. I don't really know why. I think she might have been abusing drugs, coping with my dad's death. I think she also got diagnosed with schizophrenia. CPS caught wind, and next thing I knew, I was being raised in homes where I was beaten, reminded of my faults. You know, my mother may have made mistakes, but she's the only one who understood my problems. Everyone else struggled to help me. Yase didn't say anything for a minute, the words I spoke sinking its fangs into the back of his head, sucking out the last of his consciousness. The unsettling silence felt elongated and stretched until Yase felt he had to say something. I'm sorry, man. I really am. How could they just strip you away from your mother? My mother was ill, diagnosed with schizophrenia. They tried diagnosing me with it when I was a kid. It didn't work, too young, but I have been diagnosed with brief psychotic disorder, as well as sleep paralysis. It's a hard thing to live with, and sometimes I see my mom. Yase peeked over at me while he drove. My mother lives the Rastafarian lifestyle. In our culture, it's a lifestyle where you grow out your dreads, barely touch them, you wear certain clothes, eat certain food. It has so many preset rules. When I moved out to get away from my family, I told her I thought the way she lived was disgusting. I regret that more than anything in my life. I should have taken part in it. It's my culture, and instead of embracing it, I disrespected it, and that is something I will never forgive myself for. Mark, we all make mistakes. And you're a victim. The sincerity in his tone shook Mark. He felt a new sense of companionship with his childhood friend. Wow, why don't you start now? Feel too ashamed, I suppose. Maybe someday, but it'd have to start with my mom. I deserve that, and so does she. My point is, don't let this tear you up. Don't think of yourself as a villain. There was a moment where neither of them talked. They just let the words sink in. Well, we're here, bud. We won't stay long, I promise. Mark and Yase got out of the car, the cultural difference yet agreement that they came to stun him. How could two people who come from two completely different cultures and worlds come to an understanding about one another? He wanted to talk to Yase more. But before he knew it, there was no sight of Yase. Mark found himself, blankly stuck in a crowd of people, a dandelion in a field of dying weeds. All the shouting, all the cries, they mixed together into an awful symphony of mental horror for Mark. He rushes to the bathroom, locking the door behind him before splashing water on his face. God damn it, what is wrong with? His mind stops moving. For once, he wasn't asleep. For once, it felt even more surreal. His mother, sitting on the sink, her hollow face staring right at him in the mirror. His body was stunned, his breath stunned. What was happening? Oh Mark, what are you doing here? My darling little boy would never come to a peg of the cigarette the nurse gave him. He gave her a wave before simply walking away. He felt extending the interaction could sour it, when that was honestly one of the most reassuring conversations he's had. But as he got back in his truck, he realized there was no sleep tonight. He had to go back to work. He also had the sudden realization Yase still wasn't around. He shot him a call, no answer. Other than just sitting in the car waiting for him, he wasn't quite sure on what else to do. He leaned his head back in the seat, his neck joints cracking gently. When was the last time I worked out? Mark thought. When was the last time I even stretched? Mark looked out the window and the tall standing pine trees. He could smell the pine. And as he inhaled the sweet aroma of nature, he slipped into sleep. This time he wasn't taken anywhere. He wasn't in what he believed to be his old house. He wasn't in one of his foster homes. He was in the truck. Yase's truck. But something felt off. He could feel something eating away at him. He lifted his head and saw the faceless woman again. Mark's manner diminished. He felt so small. Why won't you just leave me alone? The woman giggled softly. Leave you? You mean like you left me? No, Mark. Never. I'm here for you. Don't you understand? I want to help you. They stole you away from me. But it's coming. Just like I said it would. Mark could feel his muscles tighten. The muscles surrounding his arm hairs tightened, shooting the hairs straight up. Mom, stop this, please, you're gone. The faceless woman tilted her head, her literal blank expression laying down an uncanny feeling. Oh honey, I never left. She brought her hands up slowly to Mark's chest, gently placing her palms on his shirt before he felt a heavy impact. Falling out the vehicle, he couldn't help but notice there was no second impact. He was just falling. Sometimes he fell fast, sometimes slow, sometimes it felt like he was suspended in air, space, and time. Mark began to violently scream. With that, he jolted forward, finding himself back in the vehicle. He slammed his head forward so fast his head hit the dashboard with immense force. He could feel a little blood trickle from the top of his nose down his cheek and into his mouth. The blood tasted bitter, like copper, but at least it reminded him this was real. He was okay. Jesus Christ, Mark. Yase yelled out from the driver's seat. They were driving. They were almost back to the building they were working at. Dude, I think you broke your fucking nose. Mark bunched up his shirt in his hand and gently tapped it against the gash on his nose. Even the gentle taps struck his pain receivers. I am sorry, Yase. I was having a night terror. I think driving made it worse. So it's my fault? Yase said with a slightly agitated tone. He was trying to be a good friend, but he can only deal with so much in one night. No. Tonight has just been, I don't know, eventful. Mark rubbed the remaining blood off his face, his nose still sore and actively swelling. Yase let out an exasperated sigh. I get it, man, it's been a long night, I'm sorry. I really didn't know Vanessa would be there. We don't have to talk about it. Mark snapped back immediately. I'm just glad she's safe. Mark, you never told me what happened between you guys. It seems pretty serious. Yase Mark stopped himself. It dawned on him, he hadn't told anyone what happened with him and Vanessa. No, you're right, Jay. I need to talk about this. Yase didn't say anything, just waited patiently for him to talk, and as Mark got his words together, he still stayed silent. Me and Vanessa broke up like a month ago. We were Mark painfully sighed, quivering as the memories came back. It was the first time I had a sleep paralysis episode in a long time. It was really bad, like really bad. I freaked out. When I woke up I thought I was having a schizophrenic episode. I couldn't discern what was reality and what wasn't. I went into a psychosis, I thought. Mark began to choke on his words, tears streaming down his face as the memories prodded and jabbed at his brain. I thought she was going, and I heard her. When I came to, we were in opposite corners of the room, cuts and bruises. Mark choked on his words, they were too hard to swallow. I'm an awful person, Yase. As Mark began to bawl his eyes out, he folded his hands over his face to hide his shame, to hide the monster he thought he was. Damn, Mark. That's I don't even. Yase looked over at Mark and saw it. I wonder if that's a good thing. Yase felt concern for his friend. He thought back to when they met. Zhao was about 16 years old, Mark was maybe 14. It was the infamous neighborhood of Compton, California. Yase was walking home when he saw a scrawny white kid being beat on by two older boys. Yase barreled towards the boy immediately. Hey! Hey! Get the fuck off him! Young Yase pleaded out. He was trying to sound tough, but it didn't work. Oh yeah? Or what? You think you can do something about it? The older kids dropped the bloodied, smaller child. Run! He shouted as he started his own altercation with the bullies. Yase felt every punch slam into his face, his ribs, his stomach. He was on the verge of bawling and puking when the smaller kid tackled one of the older boys. They all fought until sundown, when the older kids finally gave up and went home. The two younger children, battered and bruised, exchanged a look of mutual pain and understanding of that pain. Tears fell down their faces onto the grass stained red from their blood. With that they laughed and walked each other home. Yase looked back on that moment fondly. It was a sad moment but a great memory. The day he met Mark, that scrawny white kid couldn't fight for shit, but neither could Yase. When he returned to the office, Mark was already awake. He was quiet. The rest of the night went on without any other events. Mark did his rounds. They watched over the security cameras, and both caught a little more shut-eye. Looking back now, they wish they knew that would be one of their few last chances to sleep. Outro. As the night unfolds, Mark and Yase are left grappling with more questions than answers. What was the man really doing in that van? And why did everything about him feel so wrong? The mystery deepens, leaving Mark to wonder if they've just scratched the surface of something far more sinister. With danger lurking in the shadows and paranoia creeping in, they are about to discover that some encounters don't end when the night does. The tension is rising, and the truth may be far darker than they ever anticipated. Stay tuned for what comes next, because in this game of cat and mouse, no one is safe.